Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Lindsey Sharman. I am the curator of the Art Gallery of Alberta.
And I'm Danielle Siemens. I'm the collections manager and curatorial associate at the AGA.
And we are both very happy to be hosting our event this afternoon, which is a virtual tour of The Scene, an exhibition that Danielle and I have curated at the AGA. The show is up right now at the Art Gallery of Alberta, and although we remain closed to the public, that exhibition will be ready to go whenever health restrictions allow us to open up again.
So this is a show that features all artists based in or closely associated with the city of Edmonton, or Amiskwatsy-Waskahigan. So this is land on which we're situated is Treaty 6 territory and part of the Métis Nation of Alberta, where Indigenous peoples have been making and creating since time immemorial. These are the ancestral and traditional lands of diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Dene, Nitsitapi or Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, and Métis. We acknowledge and extend gratitude to the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations and who continue to call this place home today. So we are, of course, privileged in this digital realm to gather together from multiple places. So I encourage any of you who do not share these same lands with us to take a moment to acknowledge the people of the land on which you are situated and tuning in from.
So before we start our tour, I'd like to thank EPCOR for their support. EPCOR supports all of our online programming through their Heart and Soul Fund. And we'd also like to thank and acknowledge Canada Council for their generous support. So today, the tour that we're going to go on is about 30 minutes, after which Danielle and I will take your questions, but you don't have to wait until the end of the tour to ask any questions that come up. You can put them in the chat function that we have here at any time, and then we'll get to those questions towards the end. So with that, here's our tour.
Welcome to Scene. We are here now with the AGA to share this new exhibition with all of you. So The Scene is an exhibition that Danielle and I have curated together. It shows all Edmonton artists and has been a project that we've been working on for a number of years, have been working on for a very long time, and so it's really exciting to see it all come together in the exhibition space. So as I mentioned, it's all Edmonton artists. This is kind of our loose theme that holds all of the artists together, and we're wanting to really showcase and celebrate the kind of diversity of practices that we have in Edmonton. So all of the artists are emerging or mid-career. And so there are a couple of themes that have sort of emerged. All of the artists being located in Edmonton. I think that the city itself and this area and this land is definitely a theme that has come out. There is also the kind of natural and the artificial and our relationship with the natural world and how we kind of navigate that, whether it's through walking in the river valley or through navigated through screens and things like that.
Mm-hmm. I think one final theme is that of the body. So the artist's own body or the body of others, and how bodies exist within societal expectations. So
yeah. So with that, I think we'll head on inside. So here we are in the first room of the exhibition. So there are several artists that are represented here. The first that I'd like to draw your attention to is Yong Guan, and also Jill Stanton, who's just in the mural behind me here. And I think these two works together, I think, are really exciting. There's some really interesting connections between them. So, of course, if we talk about the mural first, you can see that it is this monumental trash. And so what Jill is doing is kind of taking language of monumental landscape and kind of presenting these bags of garbage and what you might find kind of in your back alley, and presenting it as this sort of atmospheric and monumental landscape. And I think if we look at that sort of in conversation or relationship with this work, which also has its pair behind you here, the pair of lions. So this work was conceptualized out of two events. One would be the Harbin Gate, which is very near where the AGA is. And so the Harbin Gate was taken down for the new LRT line to go through. And so Faye is looking at that event and kind of thinking of it in relationship to Chinatown, how that changes Chinatown, how that relates to Chinatown, both historically, contemporarily, and kind of looking to the future. And the second event that this work is related to was China, along with many other countries, making the decision not to take other countries' recycling any longer. And so looking at kind of our relationship to recycling and kind of thinking of that in relation also to trash, and if there are not effective ways to recycle, that those objects that we don't really think much about consuming or using actually do become trash and just become discarded. And I think is also a way to kind of start a conversation of thinking critically of the entire recycling industry.
And if you can't tell from where you are, these two lines are completely made of recycled waste. So milk jugs and 6-pack can rings. Mm-hmm. So I think we'll move and talk about Lauren Crazybull.
Mm.
Okay, so this is one of 3 paintings we have by the artist Lauren Crazybull. Lauren's practice for several years has been focused on portraiture. So they are quite interested in the relationship that's embedded in the act of painting a person. So in that imbalanced power dynamic between the artist and the sitter, and then between the viewer and the sitter. So Lauren individually paints people that they know, spend time with, photograph, and then translates into painting. And there are these really kind of powerful portrayals of individual people. Oftentimes their gaze is kind of confronting you, staring right back at you. And then together they become this really beautiful collective portrait of a community or kin. What I quite enjoy about some of these portraits as well are these other little elements that are embedded in them. So in this painting of Connor, for example, you have this little object in the corner. I don't quite know if it's a toy or maybe a dog's ball. So you have these glimpses of the person's environment that might tell you something about them, but also leaves the narrative open-ended. You kind of have to fill in the details. So I think we'll move to talk about Emmanuel's work, which Lindsey will show you one of his paintings.
Yeah, so one of the things that I kind of really appreciate and enjoy about Lauren and Emmanuel's work, they are hung sort of side by side on this wall, and there's another few of Lauren's over there and Emmanuel's kind of further behind me. They're both unframed, unstretched. And there's something really interesting to me about the kind of immediacy that you feel in both of the works. They are both painting, and so I think it's kind of like an interesting choice that both of the artists have opted to have their have their canvases in kind of this raw and immediate sense. So Emmanuel's work, a lot of his practice stems from his experience of coming to Canada from Nigeria. So when he came to Canada, he was expecting this sort of perfect utopia of a country. When he got here, of course, he came to the realization that that is definitely not the case, and he recognized that, you know, Canada struggles with the same sort of colonial and racist histories and current situations that a lot of countries are also facing. And so his kind of interest in utopia, in seeking utopia, in creating utopia, and how you kind of find it and maybe explore that within your own life. And so that's led him to be very interested in Edmonton, in particular in the River Valley, and how that sort of outdoor idyllic space is used for leisure, but is also used for living. And that there's lots of folks that kind of make their home in camps along the River Valley. And so looking at this sort of strip of land from these very, very different perspectives, this has also led him to be very interested in backyards. I think he has just a very kind of genuine appreciation and love of people that tend to their gardens. But there's also something in that, you know, sort of how you're creating a space for yourself and sort of carving out what you might imagine as your own utopia, and how you're able to produce that. So I think we'll just head over to have a look at some video work that's in the exhibition.
So this is a work by Taran Kanederman. Taran often works in printmaking, in installation, and in video, as you can see here. So this is one of two works. And she's really kind of adopting the visual language of popular videos we might see on YouTube. So the kind of getting ready video or personal routine, or the how-to video, which are really popular, like how to boil an egg or how to cut an onion. But as you watch, there's this really kind of surreal element. So in one video, she's cracking and frying an egg. And as she cracks the egg, a little, the yolk is in the shape of a human brain. And then in the next film, she's drawing a bath, and the bath bombs are the form of an anatomical heart. So for each of these, she actually made the objects, cast them, and made them for the videos. And so a part of her interest is this kind of popular culture of self-care, but thinking about how to actually get into our interiors or into our bodies. So they have this really kind of surreal quality to them, and kind of comic as well.
So here we are in the installation by Dwayne Martineau. So here you kind of walk into a darkened room in the gallery, and you'll see this circle of kind of strange looking figures. So what you see in the images are actually images of trees. And so there are two images that have then been paired together in the middle that kind of give sort of this mirror-like image on either side. But what that effect does is also kind of create faces that you see within these trees, and the trees themselves sort of become these kind of spirits, or spirits of the forest, or kind of individuals. So Dwayne is really interested in our interaction with the natural world. So he is sort of fascinated by this world, kind of in air quotes, natural world that's sort of all around us, and that's kind of functioning in tandem to our everyday lives that we very rarely stop and take notice of. So like Emmanuel, Dwayne is quite interested in the river valley, and so is often taking walks through the river valley, but yeah, sees kind of the natural world or the nature that he sees and what he encounters as both fascinating and terrifying, and this kind of part of the world that he's not really kind of equipped to fully understand or even come close to be able to comprehend. So the work itself is also called Strange Jury. And the installation, it's really designed for interaction pretty much with one person at a time, where you would kind of be drawn into this circle of figures. As you're standing inside, you can then sort of turn around and see and really be watched by this sort of strange jury. And it's this kind of uncomfortable sense of this jury that's, probably also judging you at the same time. So in this section of the gallery, there are several works by Morgan Melenka. So everything that's around me now is from Morgan. So Morgan is a printmaker, but she really kind of tests the limits of what printmaking could be. She's really interested in contemporary building materials, and so often materials that are quite flimsy or plastic or some sort of plastic composite that has a more luxurious material actually printed on top of it. She's also interested in kind of architectural details in our contemporary built environment that often would go unnoticed. So one of the works that I find the most interesting of hers are the gate posts. And so those are these larger works here. And so they're modeled after a fairly common architectural flourish that you might see out front of a strip mall or, kind of at the edge of a parking lot. And there are these details that are quite familiar, but really finding the history of them is a little bit difficult. And so she's interested in those kind of elements of our everyday that are really everywhere and are recognizable, but we're not really paying any attention to them. And so what she's wanting to do is really draw attention to them and monumentalize them. So what she's done with the gate posts, she's actually made smaller versions of them that we have over here. And so she's turned these gate posts into keychains. And so she's taken, what you would imagine as, you kind of imagine that you would very commonly find such a thing of the Eiffel Tower and things like that, and those sort of monumental, recognizable and memorable elements, and kind of taken this detail that we don't really think of and kind of placed it within the same visual language as that.
Okay, so this is a video work by Gabriel Molina. And Gabriel is really interested in the mediation of our experiences through technology. So this work was made while he was in Iceland doing a residency. And he was spending a lot of time in the beautiful outdoors of Iceland and filming the world around him and streaming it back home using regular social media apps like Instagram and Twitch. But then he became quite fascinated in how those apps distort our imagery by their algorithms are compressing and distorting the images we take. So they become actually these really sort of inadequate ways of documenting and sharing our experiences in nature specifically, but also more generally. And then he was also, I think he's commenting a little bit about the tourism industry, particularly Iceland and the hashtag #MyStopover, which was quite prevalent a few years ago, promoting Iceland as a place to visit and as a place to stop while you're flying somewhere else, and how these tourism campaigns that are really aggressively promoted through social media actually really impact our choices and what we decide to do in the world. Okay, so this is a work by Tiffany Shaw-Collinge. And Tiffany is an artist in the city, but also an architect. So she's someone that's quite interested in the built environment, and she has quite a bit of public art in the city. These are works where she is looking at familial sites. So this example is her mother's house, and then we have another set of similar work, that's her grandmother's house. So she has pinpointed these locations that are meaningful to her and her family in Google Maps, and then used a series of computer programs to make these layers of images. So the nice thing in this exhibition is we are actually showcasing a part of the process of the making. So here you have the digital image, and then she uses a CNC router to make this final three-dimensional image in wood. And what's interesting about Tiffany is she actually considers those technologies, such as the CNC wood router, as a kind of collaborator. So she doesn't have full control of what the final image will look like, but that technology is a part of, kind of has a say in what the final image will turn out. So there's two examples of the digital image and then the final wooden piece. And in this room, we have two other artists who are also using the grid as a kind of, thinking about the grid as a formal and conceptual tool. So we're gonna go look at some of those now with Kim McCollum and April Dean.
All right, so in this space, also sharing space with Tiffany in this room of the gallery is April Dean on my left, and Kim McCollum has several works here as well. So yeah, as Danielle mentioned, I think there's something really interesting happening here with a kind of interest in the grid. So Kim is a weaver, and so we do have some actual weavings of hers, and these are our paintings. And so through her paintings, she's looking at historical weaving patterns and kind of translating them into these monumental paintings, and I think offering a really interesting both archive as well as monumentalization of that work that often really goes unnoticed. And April here, I don't know if you can see the sort of grid in these works from there, but they do have this grid that overlays the entire image and is related to the screens that you would have it in, like a screen door or in a window on your home. So she's interested in our separation as well as interaction with the natural world. What you see in the images are plants propagating in jars. And so April, she's kind of really interested in the phenomena of houseplants. I think it's something that is often sort of formatted or described as kind of a typically millennial pastime of having houseplants, but I think is also something that you've seen a real rise in through the pandemic of people buying plants for their homes and having more of an interest in their homes, but also more interest in caring for something, I suppose. And so April is propagating plants and sort of sees that propagation and also their distribution to friends and family and loved ones as kind of an anti-capitalist gesture, because the plants, of course, are like printmaking that she's working with, are kind of infinitely reproducible, but then sort of overlaid with that very kind of domestic grid, conveying kind of our own interaction with plants, whether it be within our own home, sort of sitting on a windowsill, or, you know, in a garden as you're sort of peering out into your kind of pseudo-natural environment. So here we're just standing in front of a couple of works by Tamires. So she has several works in the exhibition. She is, I guess, maybe quite similarly to Lauren Crazybull, kind of interested in the history of painting within sort of a Western art historical sort of lens, and looking at it as something that is primarily dominated by men, and within the concepts of Western art history by white men. And so she's interested in kind of taking those tropes of historical and references to historical painting, where, you know, you might see some references to Caravaggio or Bacon, and kind of those individuals in art history, and kind of playing with that a little bit.
Yeah, so in Tamires' painting, she's often painting herself or other women she's met and spent time with as a kind of response to the patriarchal society she's grown up in and that has shaped her worldview. Oftentimes the paintings also have this element of violence, I think, speaking to her experiences and to other women's experiences, and kind of undermining what Lindsey was talking about, these art historical tropes, so kind of taking control of their own message and story and identity. Okay, so this is the final artist in our tour of the scene. This is work by Kasie Campbell. And Kasie Campbell often works in sculpture and performance. So this work is a little bit different, but it's photographic documentation from work that was happening at the very beginning of the pandemic. So she had a newborn and was also dealing with the grief of the loss of her mother and the beginnings of the pandemic and the anxieties around that. So she was nursing her child, and her regular kind of postpartum anxieties are really exasperated by the unknown conditions of the pandemic. So worrying about having enough to feed her baby. If she got sick, would her baby have enough nourishment? So she started pumping and saving that milk in these bags, and then using the bags as a kind of visual daily diary. So sometimes she's documenting more mundane things about breastfeeding. So here you have all the feeding times of the day. But then some of the other bags are commentary on perhaps the pain after birth, or how she's feeling physically, or more personal and kind of poetic messages, things to her mother. For example, one of them says, "When you were dying, I decided I was going to have a baby." So I think with this, she's really mourning the loss of her mother, the absence of her child's grandmother. So we have just a selection of the few months that she was doing this for. Okay, so thank you so much for joining Lindsey and I on the tour of the scene. And we're going to now move into a question and answer period, and hope you can stick around.
All right, thanks a lot. And yeah, I'll just point out that Danielle was putting all of the artist names in the chat. So if you are kind of having or wondering about the names of the artists, they're all there for you. And yeah, if anybody has any questions for Danielle and I, or questions about the work, please just put it in the chat and we'll try to address them as best we can. Yeah, I guess one of the things that I kind of mentioned in the intro was that Danielle, when you and I were kind of putting together this exhibition, I think one of the things that we kind of purposely didn't want to do was sort of define like this is an Edmonton style, or this is the only thing that's happening in Edmonton, but we were wanting to really kind of give a taste of all of the really exciting things that happen here. But of course, a lot of similarities did come out. And so, yeah, I'm wondering, Danielle, if you could share just some of the maybe themes that emerged in the show that you found were particularly like exciting or surprising.
Mm-hmm. I think one for me was a focus on screens and grids. So you had talked about in the tour, like the relationship between Kim and April, but I think there's also a really nice connection between April and Gabriel in terms of this sort of technological mediation of our experiences of nature, and how viewing things through screens and devices becomes this kind of imperfect way of recording and sharing our experiences. But then also, I think Tiffany's work is quite interesting because she's looking at mapping, which is this constraining device, and especially in Edmonton, where we are, a lot of the city is on this grid, but then really kind of undermining that grid through these 2D and 3D processes into this final object, which I think is a bit of a decolonial act when you're thinking about mapping. But then there's this relationship too with Kim's work, who's also interested in the grid as this kind of conceptual and visual tool. But then she is translating the grid through painting and weaving, which is ultimately a hand-done activity. So the grid is then, again, not this perfect constraining device. So the grid and the screens I thought was really interesting. And I really love that one room with those three together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. Was there anything for you?
Yeah, well, I think definitely this like mediation through screens. And I guess like when I was listening to you on the tour, when you were talking about Taran's work, which I actually hadn't really kind of put in that sort of category, but it's definitely an aspect of her work as well that I really didn't think about until today, that, she's looking at, kind of the language of YouTube videos and things like that. And I think it's super interesting. Like we did start planning this exhibition and start working on it before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. It's been kind of postponed and it was supposed to be up a while ago. But I think that, it's kind of the pandemic has made those elements of the show maybe a little bit more urgent feeling and a little bit more important, where, of course, I think, before the pandemic, we did, of course, also experience a lot of our lives through screens and kind of have that kind of play with mediation. But I think it comes up, especially now that like the majority of our life is kind of experienced through screens.
Yeah, I see we do have a question. So how much work did you have to select from? How many artists in Edmonton did you get to explore? So as you mentioned, this show has been probably over 2 years in the making. It was supposed to be up about a year ago and then was delayed. We probably met with we were just at the time meeting with a lot of Edmonton artists. I don't know, probably a lot.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I mean, many artists that we've met. And I think that there are so many interesting artists working in the city and lots of interesting practices, and lots of artists that we met that they may not have been in the show, but they're artists that we kind of use that to build a connection with and kind of engage with later. So yeah, we did a lot of a lot of studio visits for sure.
What was, I mean, of course, there are so many people I'd love to have in the show. But I think what was nice about what we did was each artist in the show has a lot of space. And for some of them, they're working on a greater scale than maybe they were before. I think like April's photographs and Kasie's, I don't think had ever been that big. And Dwayne's installation was quite large, even though he's done similar work before. So while there aren't a ton of people in the show in the end, everyone really has, you can really see quite a bit of their practices from the space they have in the exhibition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like, you know, when you mentioned Dwayne's, especially, I think like that for me was one of the most kind of like surprising or like exciting studio visits that we did. I really wasn't familiar with Dwayne's work before we set out to do this show. And yeah, I've become a huge fan. And I think that it was nice to be able to give his work that entire space. And so he could have that entire installation and really have kind of room to play around. I should say with that installation that there's also, you can't really get it from the video, but there is a sound component as well. And so it really does kind of make this really kind of like immersive environment. And the audio component is just found footage from just found outdoor footage that he's slowed down. And so it kind of adds to this sort of like discomfort or creepiness that you might have in that space.
Mm-hmm. I have another question. So you were talking about screens and like thinking about how that has sort of shifted a little bit in the context of this year. Is there any other work for you that has you're thinking about differently because we selected it all before the pandemic?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I guess, I mean, maybe Morgan's a little bit. I think like, you know, there's also this like huge explosion of building happening now. And, you know, like even like the price of and demand for like all of our building materials is just like gone through the roof. And I think so her kind of interest in cheaper building materials, I think maybe I kind of think of her as like a little bit different as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question here. Do you think that there is an Edmonton style or a general direction in the work you see? You stumped us, Dwayne. No, I really...
no, yeah.
Yeah, I don't... I mean, I do think that there is definitely like an interest in connection to a natural world. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's not coming out in all of the artists, but I think that it's in a lot of artists' practices that are in this show, but also, you know, that are just kind of working in Edmonton. And I think even, you know, the amount of artists right now that are interested in plants or planting or, you know, as we see with like Emmanuel here, backyards and back alleys and the river valley and things like that. So, but if that's a style, I don't think so.
No. Yeah, one thing, I mean, this doesn't have to do with style necessarily, but we asked quite a few of the artists, or we asked all of them, and some of them responded about sort of what the Edmonton art scene was to them. And so many people just talked about the community. So the people and the resources and the fact that we are, you know, sort of away from what we might consider more of the big art centers, and just how much community was important. And a lot of the artists we chose are really kind of important community leaders, like April Dean running Snap, or Kim has a weaving space on the north side of the city. And so they have these art practices, but are also just so involved in furthering the arts in the city in other ways through teaching and running spaces. So again, that's not a style, but just something that really came through in this show. So, okay, we have a question. Any advice for an early career artist or curator when it comes to navigating through the current state of our environment, pandemic? Do you both have a new perspective or new considerations of your curatorial practices that you will continue to consider moving forward?
I don't know if this is going to be like a complete answer to your question, but I think one of the things that I was kind of maybe surprised by in our like research phase of this exhibition was a lot of it happened on Instagram. And I think, you know, there was like probably once a time where you needed a website as an artist to kind of be visible and be seen. But more and more, I think, you know, and of course now that we're in a pandemic, that you can't go to museums or galleries, that everything is also moving online. But yeah, like I found that, you know, a lot of even just like finding artists, a lot of it did happen like on social media and in Instagram in particular.
Yeah. And I think right now, in terms of curatorial practices, because things are still so unknown, I think the sort of doing a lot of large international things is more difficult right now and a lot more unknown. So I think for me, it's really unfortunate the gallery's closed because almost the entire gallery is artists from the city, and it really is showcasing how much amazing art we have. So I'm really excited for it to open, and I think that that is definitely something to consider moving forward. So Royden Mills asked us, did the artists get to have time together discussing the work as a group? And so far, not really. We have gotten together once digitally or virtually, kind of as a meet and greet, but unfortunately all the things we would have done, such as an opening and other kind of public events, haven't been able to happen. But it would be a really great conversation to hear more of the artists and maybe some of the connections that they didn't think of before.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that I kind of appreciated, that in non-pandemic time, that we probably wouldn't have done, was like to just get together with just the artists. Like Danielle said, we had a meet and greet that was online, but it was just us. So typically, you know, you would have a public opening and have everybody together, but it was nice to kind of just sit down for a little bit with just the artists.
Did any of these artists study in the same place? Are they self-taught or schooled? Yeah, that's the question. Well, I think several studied at the U of A. Now I'm trying to think of everyone's biography.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, several would have studied at the U of A. Emmanuel right now is currently doing his MFA in Guelph, so I think he's actually the only artist who isn't currently in Edmonton.
Morgan.
Oh yeah, Morgan.
I know, Morgan's left us.
Yeah, so a lot of them would have studied together.
So you have a question from Carolyn. How do you curate a show? Do you select a topic and then artists submit and then you choose?
So some shows are different than others. So in this case, we were wanting to just do a show about Edmonton artists. So there wasn't a theme in mind, which I think we kind of discussed. And so it was just about meeting with lots of people. And of course, we're always meeting with local artists. But and then in this case, we really want to show a diverse array of practices. So, you know, we have photo, video, print, sculpture, painting, installation. And then the themes kind of emerged from the artists who were really interested in, and some of the themes come together when we then placed the work. But in this case, it didn't start out with a strong kind of concept or theme. But
yeah, I think
we talk about other shows maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think every show is curated a little bit differently. Yeah, like sometimes you would kind of start with a theme and then go from there. Sometimes, you know, like with this one, you start with, you know, just a region or area where you're wanting to draw artists from, or just the artists themselves, and the theme sort of comes from that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we're kind of approaching the end of our time. Danielle, did you want to add anything more about any of the artists in the show, or?
Not really. I mean, I really want to say congratulations to all of them. I'm really excited about their practices, and really hope that people can see the show. I think we'll be sharing, we all have all these installation shots now, so I think a lot of this will be shared more so people can see them. But yeah, I don't really have much more to add. How about you?
No, yeah, I just also would like to congratulate everybody. Congratulations to you too, Danielle. Nice work.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so I guess with that, we'll just kind of wrap it up for the day. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I just wanted to draw your attention to one thing. We do have a survey. Helen is going to put the survey in the chat for us. And if you want to offer us any feedback of our events, what more you'd like to see, times of days of the week that sort of work for you, better or worse, you can put that in that Google Doc that Helen has just put the link for there. So please, if you have a few more minutes to kind of offer us a little feedback to help us with future programs. And other than that, thanks everybody, and enjoy your Saturday.
Thank you.